Big Seance Podcast 134, another listener feedback episode, plus your 2019 astrological forecast from Dena DeCastro.
Welcome to the Big Seance Podcast. I'm Patric Kohler of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Ladies and gentlemen, paranerds of all ages, I have a massive listener feedback episode for you, plus a bonus. I've asked our astrologer, Dena DeCastro, to give us our forecast for 2019, so stay tuned. We're going to kick things off today with a voicemail and a question from Meredith.
Hi, Patric. My name is Meredith Hill. I'm a really big fan of your podcast, and I've been listening to lots of your episodes, especially the ones about psychic medium development. And I had a question I'd like you to ask the next time you interview someone, which is, if death is an illusion, how do you explain reincarnation? I look forward to listening to your podcast in the future. Have a good day.
I often see questions like this asked in the Big Seance Parlor, and it's a theme you'll also hear in an email in just a few minutes. Because of this, I decided to dig in and consult two experts on Meredith's behalf. And hopefully, it'll answer some of your questions as well. And so the first person I contacted was a man named Simon Bown from the Past Lives podcast. As a hypnotherapist, Simon is highly qualified to answer this question. And if you check out his site, I know you'll agree. The link to that site will be in the show notes. I gave him Meredith's question, and here's what he had to say.
Hello, this is Simon from the Past Lives podcast, and Patric has asked me to answer a question from Meredith. She asks, if death is an illusion, then how do you explain reincarnation? Well, let's look at reincarnation. From my viewpoint as a hypnotherapist that takes people through past life regressions, I see that we are all energetic beings. Now, these beings could be called souls or spirits or whatever you feel is right. Each of us, as an energetic being, has a higher self that sees each life from a higher perspective, where they are outside the cycle of reincarnation. Now, what this means is that when we reincarnate, only a small percentage of us is in the body. Death is an illusion to us living here on Earth, but to our higher selves, it is just a transition, and we go through these transitions over and over, through many lives until our cycle is complete. I hope that's helped answer the question.
I also contacted our friend and psychic medium, Claire Broad, for her wisdom on this subject. Here's Claire.
Hi, Patric. Hi, Meredith. Hi, everybody listening to the Big Seance Podcast. This is Claire Broad. Meredith, you've put a brilliant question to Patric. If death is an illusion, how do you explain reincarnation? Well, it's a massive question and one I can't do full justice to in a few minutes, but here you go. I'm going to try and give it a whirl and answer your question. As a medium working with the general public for over 20 years, I can share the insights I've been able to glean. And I can give you my contemplations on reincarnation, give you some food for thought. For me, the place to start when thinking about reincarnation is to ask ourselves, what is consciousness? The truth is there isn't a definitive clear-cut answer to this question as we don't understand it scientifically. Mainstream science believes the brain gives rise to consciousness, but it doesn't understand how cells exchanging chemicals and electrical impulses can give rise to such amazing phenomena such as imagination and dreams. As a medium who has perceived contact from disincarnate beings or spirits, I've had personal experience that makes me aware consciousness can't just be a byproduct of the brain, and it's more likely the processor of it. In perceiving spirit beings, my experience informs me that consciousness continues beyond physical death. And what's more, the spirit dimension isn't governed by the same laws of space and time that the physical reality we live in is. To contemplate reincarnation, then, we need to start looking at ourselves differently as infinite awareness, or spirit first and foremost, that enters a physical body to consciously experience a physical life. And as such, our ultimate reality is a far greater one than we can even truly comprehend. It's a reality which holds infinite possibility, though. So when it comes to the reality of death, yes, on one level, death does exist because the physical body dies and consciousness ceases to be able to express itself through the physical body. But on another level, the spirit reality, the physical world was just smoke and mirrors. It becomes illusory as the spirit detaches away from the body, and our own awareness can once again take on board a much greater reality. Of course, exactly what happens after we die is the $64 million question. From the thousands of readings I've done, my personal experience informs me that deceased loved ones and spirit guides come and greet those who've died and help them return to their primary residence in the spirit dimensions. It's here that spirit beings can become aware of what they learnt from their physical life and what they've gained. There are many dimensions even to the spirit world. So it might be that a spirit chooses to rest a while whilst they're there, wait for close loved ones to join them, or it may be having gained greater understanding, there's an instinctual need or feel that they want to return to a physical experience to gain further growth, or in some instances they may feel they've unfinished business, or they could just realise now that they can be of great service to the world. In these circumstances, then, spirit beings will find another avatar or a new physical body when the moment's right, and then they re-enter into the physical life again for another go around this merry-go-round. The concept of reincarnation, of course, has been taught for thousands of years as part of religious philosophy, so humanity's been aware of this existence for a long time, but studies carried out by academics more recently give credence to these teachings, such as the research carried out by respected psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson. Dr. Stevenson's research with young children who remember past lives shows children do sometimes display an ability to remember a previous existence, and in doing so provide enough facts about their past life that researchers were able to validate these facts, raising a question of how is it that children can have that knowledge if indeed they haven't lived before. Perhaps they really did live before. But this isn't the only way to explore the existence of past lives. It's also been done through the use of hypnosis and regression with past life therapy and through messages received during mediumship. In fact, I share more on my own personal experiences in this way in my new book, What the Dead Are Dying to Teach Us, which, Patrick, I can't wait to share with you when it comes out in September 2019. Combined, these insights give us understanding that consciousness is much more than we currently understand scientifically, and it informs us that with respect to ourselves, we just really don't understand the half of it. Here's the real head spinner. Scientists theorize that time doesn't even exist in the linear fashion that we experience it in a physical reality. So what if we actually experience many lives all at once? So perhaps it's more accurate to say simultaneous lives rather than past lives. They also theorize that there are many different realities even within our own universe. And in fact, a physicist who reached out to me after reading my last book, Answers from Heaven, told me scientists actually believe the universe is holographic in nature. I've got to admit it, though, at these times my brain finds it just too much to grasp, and perhaps my guides in the spirit world show me insights in a way that I can understand, and I'm sure they are simplified. What we can take from all of this is that life is much more awesome than we have any clue about, and we've only scratched the surface, really, in our understanding. Of course, none of us have all the answers, and maybe we never will, because if life and the universe is infinite, perhaps it just keeps on unfolding and giving. Perhaps that's even why we've chosen to come around for one more go here. Life is truly a marvel of marvels when I think about it. Even that we can be connected here in this space to chew over these questions and contemplate deep concepts together is a wonder to me. So Meredith, I hope I've been able to give you some answer to your question, but I'm pretty sure that I've also probably raised a whole load of more questions. Anyway, please feel free to take on board what resonates with you then and leave what doesn't. Patrick, thank you so much for the wonderful work you do, and I'm wishing all your listeners the very best.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Claire and Simon, for the time and energy it took to help us out today. It was so nice to hear those beautiful accents. Well, let's open up the mailbag. And man, do I have a lot for you since the last time we did listener feedback. The first one is an email from someone I've decided is such a great storyteller and who I've agreed to call Girl from Minnesota. As I said earlier, I grabbed this one first because it follows the same theme that Meredith's question did. And it's a rather large email, so I'm editing it just a bit. She writes, Dear Patric, I found your show soon after finding out what a podcast was over a year ago, and you do a fantastic job. I appreciate that you keep it professional without the ums, ahs, and that I mean to start a sentence that seems to be popular right now. I delete podcasts that do that. Well, I have to jump in here again because if you had any idea of some of the silly slips and things that I say constantly that you don't have to hear because I edit them out, I would have lost you as a listener a long time ago. Girl from Minnesota. Well, back to her email. I enjoy these subjects, your in-depth interview style, the guests, you just have it all. I could go on, but I know it would make you squirm, and it would seem that I'm trying to re-butter a slice of already buttered toast. But you get the idea. You rock. Thank you. She continues. I have what I can only describe as a direct line to God, and trying to describe it otherwise, I would not know how. But putting it that way seems arrogant. No, I'm not trying to be that way, but when I am scared or nervous about something, I pray, and I usually get a sign that tells me it's going to be okay. Now, I don't attend church. I don't pass out tracts. I don't spend my day trying to convert others. I am just a normal ELCA Lutheran-raised woman that believes in prayer and God is my friend. I am trying to set the scene here so you understand what I have been wanting to share with you and ask you about since it happened, maybe in April of this year. When it happened, I immediately put a note on my phone to email you. Then life fell apart and there were bigger things to take care of. I am taking advantage of the lull and getting this out to you in the darkness of morning after our first freeze warning here in Southwest Minnesota, with ripples of pink just coming up in the sky. One night in the middle of the night, I woke up choking on acid in my lungs. This had never happened before, and I was scared. My side of the bed is within, I would guess, 1.5 feet from the wall. I sat up, unable to breathe and trying to cough. I swung my feet out of bed and reached a hand out to brace myself against the wall, trying to cough it out and breathe. Barely any air was moving, with that awful noise of gasping for air filling the room. My husband lay still and listened, scared. I coughed and wheezed, and after a few minutes, I was breathing again. I lay back down and whispered to Bill. I was so scared. He agreed. My throat was on fire, and I fell asleep trying to figure out what might have caused this. The next night, Bill was out of the room brushing his teeth, and I crawled in and prayed. Please don't ever let that happen again. It was so painful and scary. I don't ever want to go through that again. Then I heard a response from a voice I have never heard before. I have never experienced any voices in my head, Patric, thank you. The male voice said, I sent that because you were not breathing. Now I'm doing some serious backpedaling. Thank you for sending that. You get the idea. The next day, I rolled it around in my head. How does a person differentiate between a spirit guide, a dead loved one, and God in a situation such as this, where there is a voice or a sound or anything that might make a person think that it was a spirit guide? I know I have what my family has always referred to as an angel or ghost that looks after me. I have never seen her, but others in my family have. She is about 13, pale white, in a white nightgown sort of dress with long black hair. We call her Gertie, but I think her name might be Mary, as that's what my imaginary friend went by when I was a tot. She looked after me, comforted me, and kept me safe. When I was 12, my parents divorced, and Mom worked nights. That left me home alone at night, but Gertie was there, and it was fine. She would visibly sit on my bed. I could see the indentation as well as feel it, and I felt looked after. She was a prankster. She loved blue things, and if it was blue, we might never see it again. Blue Tupperware glasses, blue telephone, blue towels. We quit buying blue things. I don't think she liked it that I began wearing makeup occasionally at 14 and flung it off the closet shelf when I was not in the room. When I was born, until about 10 years old, there was a piano in the house, and she would tinker at it in the night. When I was in Saudi with the army, I had not purchased a new bottle of sunscreen to bring with me, as I had wanted to. And when I unpacked and realized this, I was bummed. I went off to work for the day, and when I came back, there on the table was a bottle of sunscreen from home that I recognized because the writing on the bottle was worn in the same pattern it was on the bottle that I intentionally left behind because I wanted a fresh bottle for the intense sun of Saudi's 120-degree days. I could go on with many stories of her presence, but you get the idea about Gertie. I'm asking for help, and you're the one I want to turn to. The Bible says reincarnation and the belief in it is wrong, but so many out there say it is true. I used to never believe in it. Now I'm thinking otherwise. Here's what I was told about Gertie once through a friend. My best friend in high school was Karen, longtime friends, and she knew about Gertie. I don't know the situation that she was in to gather this information, but while I was in Saudi, she wrote me a letter that explained that a gal she knew told her who Gertie was. Gertie was my daughter in a past life, and we were on a wagon train, and something went terribly wrong. I died. She has spent her life trying to reconnect with me because she loved me so much. I refused to believe this back then, but now it haunts me. After recently reading a book that touched on some history, I looked up this story and it gave me chills. Is this the wagon train that I died in? Mountain Meadows Massacre. The book, if you're interested, Letters of a Woman Homesteader by Eleanor Pruitt Stewart, a free read on Kindle. Really good nonfiction book. What do you think? Is a God that helps me? A spirit guide? My daughters? A past loved one? I don't have too many loved ones on the other side. The three I mourn sometimes are my maternal grandma and my son's dad's paternal grandma and his mother. Both my godparents are gone, but I wasn't especially close with them, only seeing him at Christmas time and her a few times a year besides Christmas. I don't know what to think. When I mentioned I get a visual response to my fears, I see large birds in the sky. Mostly it will be an eagle, but on occasion, a falcon has been shown to me. Then I know I'm okay. Thank you for your time, and hopefully you have an idea, answer, or guidance for me on where to turn for an answer to my question of who is my guide or protector, or how many of them does it take to take care of little old me? LOL. Yours in deep fondness, Girl from Minnesota. So what do you think? I know Girl from Minnesota would love to get your thoughts if you feel like you have some insight. I'd be glad to forward them to her if you send it to me, Patric at bigseance.com, or you can drop it in a post in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. The next one comes from Veronica. Hi, Patric. I've been waiting to message you because I've been working my way through the podcast episode archives, but for some reason, tonight feels like the right time to shoot you a few words. I just wanted to say thank you for your podcast. Long story short, I had a rather shocking reintroduction to my spiritual side about a year ago, and I began listening to the Bizarre States podcast. Jess and Bowser led me to Diane and Denise at History Goes Bump, which of course brought me to you. While I have mad love for all of you, I have to say your format is by far my favorite. You rock. It's hard to put into words how grateful I am for your show. I've really struggled coming to terms with the experiences I've recently had, but you and your parlor guests have made me feel like I'm not crazy and you have given me tools and resources to further my personal education. Please pass on my gratitude to Marilyn Painter, Karen A. Dahlman, Chris Medina, and Dena DeCastro. Shout out Portland. Without all y'all, I would still be stuck in a sad, fearful place. I know your podcast was born out of curiosity and excitement about the paranormal, and I just wanted you to know that it means all that and more to your listeners. Thank you for all you do. Much love to you and yours, Veronica. Well, thank you, Veronica. Good news like that is what keeps me going. Next up is a message from Sharon. Hi, Patrick. Listening to your latest pod. My favorite podcast is The Big Seance. I was wondering, do you have a Patreon? I know you don't do ads, and I would love to give you money. And she has, this is me breaking in here. She inserted laughing emojis after saying she wants to give me money. You do such a great job and still keep it real as a school teacher, which is so cool. I would love to give back. I've learned so much from you, Sharon. Well, as a matter of fact, I do have a Patreon. So thank you for asking, Sharon. You can find it at patreon.com/Big Seance. And at the end of this episode, as always, I'll be thanking my Patreon Paranerd supporters. Well, next up is a cool back and forth I had with Lorna from Australia. Lorna says, Hi, Patrick. Great work on the podcasts. I'm really enjoying them, and you have such a lovely manner with your guests. If it's okay, one area I'd like to hear more about is to do with astral travel, especially to do with out-of-body travelers communicating with people who are in a coma or who have dementia while they are out of the body. I heard or read something about this years ago. Well, thanks again, Patrick. Kind regards, Lorna from Australia. I responded to Lorna and let her know something that I've shared here a few times. But one of the first books I read on my spiritual shift over a decade ago was a book about astral travel, which I thought was so far out at the time. But I do remember experiencing some cool things, especially in my dreams. It was probably a little bit too much for me that early on in my journey. So even though I'm not a big fan of rereading books, that's one of the books that would probably be great to visit again. Well, she responded back by saying, Hi, Patrick. I've read a few books on astral travel too, and I agree that it is quite daunting. I've gotten as far as having the vibrations just before sleep, but then I get scared and wake myself up. I can imagine it would be a freeing experience to actually know for sure that you're a spirit. I did a microbiology course a few years back, and even though it is accepted that our bodies are composed of different types of cells, it's quite another thing to actually see one of your own cells under a microscope, so you know it's true. That might sound silly, but I think you know what I mean by comparing theory with experience. Next up is one of my Patreon paranerds, Peggy Hagan, who I sometimes credit as Margaret Hagan. I guess I need to pick one, huh? This particular message was the first time that Peggy reached out to me. We've talked several times since then. Anyway, here's that first message. Hi, Patrick. I am a new fan of your podcast. I first listened to the interview with Slade Roberson and am now hooked. I have been binge listening ever since. I have a blog and a podcast as well. I started my blog to share info that I felt was to be shared. I have the memory of choosing this life and have always carried the memory with me. I feel I was blessed with this memory to share with others. Thank you for bringing information to we seekers. You are an excellent host, Peggy Hagan. She contacted me again with a guest suggestion by the name of Conrad Fulmer, who wrote a book called Death by the Potter's Wheel. Margaret says it is the story of his aunt who became a channel and his journey with her during that time. I'm going to have to check that out. As she mentioned, she's the host of a podcast called Pondering with Peg, and you can find her site at ponderingwithpeg.blogspot.com. This next one comes from Dawn, who sent it after hearing my episode with Joshua Black on grief dreams in episode 110. If you're interested in going back to that one, go to bigseance.com/110. Don was kind enough to reach out to both Joshua and I. He writes, Dear Patric and Joshua, I had the great honor of listening to Joshua's interview on your podcast tonight while I mucked the stalls on our little farm this evening. Patric, I have been listening to your podcast for about a week now and really love your podcast. Joshua, thank you so much for your dedication to researching grief dreams. I am a 50-something white male who currently makes my living as a software tester/computer geek in the financial services industry. I and my husband are cancer survivors. I also am an ordained independent Catholic priest. I have a blog, angelsofthenativity.org, and have just started a podcast, Spy Lumina. I think it's Spy, S-P-E-I, Lumina. Lights of Hope, Imaginal Praying. I really loved this episode, and it spoke volumes to my experience and really resonated with much that I believe. My father died when I was 10 years old, and I remember having dream visitations from him within 1 month of his passing, and a few others from 1 to 4 years after his passing. I shared them with my mother, and at the time, I am sure she attributed them to an active imagination. My twin brother and I are the youngest of 7 boys. We've always shared the dreams we've had about Dad and other vivid dreams. Many years ago, just after my treatment for ocular melanoma in 2007, I had a vivid dream about my aunt, whom I was close to after my father's death. I got to know her and my uncle more as I went to college in the same town they lived in. Simply put on the dream, she is missing, and a date is said, and somehow in my recording of the dream, I wondered if it was a premonition of her death and the date of her death. She died of colon cancer 5 years later, but on the date that was mentioned in the dream, February 12th. During your interview, the question of psychopomps came up. I would like to share as briefly as I can my experience of my soul work being that of a psychopomp. In mystical Judaism, it is believed that when the body sleeps, the soul, which needs no sleep, ascends from the body and continues to do work in the spiritual realms. Over 10 years ago, I started waking up with names in my mind. I didn't know or understand why. I started Googling the names, and I would discover that a month ago, 2 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, 2 days ago, etc., people with the names in my mind that I didn't place there had died. I vividly recall when I pieced this together one day while getting in my car to go to work. At the time, I prayed a rosary each day as I drove to work. Now I do it once or twice a month as I find myself listening to podcasts about higher consciousness or both of your podcasts while I commute. I had an aftermarket Sirius radio tuner back then. It was on, but my radio was not. I started my rosary and said, God, angels, I don't know why I wake up with these names in my mind, but I'd like to also offer up this rosary for Eleanor Chambers. I no sooner finished stating her name, and my Sirius radio beeped to tell me one of my songs I had identified as my favorite was about to come on. I happened to look down at my tuner, and Ernest Tubbs' Thanks a Lot was coming on. I didn't think that was just coincidence. When I got to my desk at work, I Googled her name, and she had died 3 days before in Davenport, Iowa, and her funeral was at 10 a.m. that morning. I told a few friends about it. One friend in particular is a mystical bishop who was in the same independent Catholic jurisdiction I was ordained a priest in, and he explained to me that my soul work was that of a psychopomp. To this day, I regularly still awake with names on my mind from my sleeping state, and more often than not, they do indeed tend to be that of people who have passed over in the past year or so. So now I regularly pray for and offer up Mass for the repose of the souls of those whose names linger in my consciousness after waking. Thanks for the work that both of you do on your podcasts. It's nice to know others out there studying, working in areas that interest me and that I've gotten involved in through no outwardly intentional reasons of my own, other than being drawn to the work and service through my interests and desire to be an agent of light on a world surrounded by so much despair, darkness, and confusion. Peace, Dawn. One of the best things about hosting this podcast and the Big Seance Parlor Facebook community is that I get to see people connect and help each other in a way I can't do myself, either because I'm not an expert or because I'm just one person. Well, I was so happy to be able to connect Patric, our next emailer, with those of you in the parlor. Here was his message. Hey, Patric, longtime listener, first-time emailer. Love the podcast. I've been listening for more than 2 years and love when a new episode pops up. The reason I'm emailing is that I've been looking for a community or group to get connected with, and after your most recent episode, I decided to reach out for help. Being raised Southern Baptist, and since having been enlightened, as it were, I have no idea where to look or anyone to ask. I'm hoping that you know someone or of a group in the Portland, Oregon area, or could give me some advice on how to go about finding people. Much thanks in advance. Love what you do and keep up the good work. Patric. And that's Patric without a K, which is so very interesting. I don't know that I've met a Patric without a K. Well, after hearing from Patric without a K and pulling this next email, I'm sensing an Irish theme. This one is from Pat Shannon from Ireland. Just listening to Christy Robinette on your podcast. You mentioned that a frog came to your front door when you were preparing for the interview. I have a story about our scout campsite. I was staffing a camp just after Halloween. The leaders asked, could we bring the scouts and cubs down to an old family church nearby? We did. We also took the keys of the crypt. We told the leaders to tell the kids a few ghost stories on the way down. Myself and Derek, my friend, went down, parked the pickup out of the way, and opened the crypt up. We had a look inside. 3 lead coffins on the left wing, all adult. 2 in the right, 1 adult and 1 baby. I have to say I didn't feel frightened, just sad. Plus I wondered, how did the English ever took Ireland? I'm not sure I read that right, but that's what. Plus I wondered, how did the English ever took Ireland? The tallest coffin was probably to my nose. That's neither here nor there. We played a prank on the leaders and the kids by jumping out on them. Lots of screams, some wet underwear, and that was the leaders. But we took them in to see the coffins and we reminded them to be quiet and respectful. Some were and some were not. One of the leaders reported seeing a haw. Then he said haw and I could see his breath. It was a warm night before then. With that, Derek looked down to see a rather angry-looking toad staring back at him. He was standing at the entrance, watching all who entered. At that point, we thought it made sense to lock up and leave. Haven't had the urge to go in that place since. Pat Shannon. Well, thanks, Pat. I hope I did the story justice. Next up is a message from Christopher Kohler, who is a Patreon Paranerd supporter. He sent in feedback on the Triangle Table episode with Slade Roberson and Ash Riley. That episode sparked so much discussion, both in the Paranerd community and Slade and Ash's respective communities, and all the discussion is something we had hoped for. If you missed that episode, go to bigseance.com/132. All right, so here's Christopher's message. Hey, Patric. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you how amazing your episode was with Slade and Ashley. It was phenomenal, and not just as a paranormal show, but as a very human one with amazing social depth. To be honest, as a straight male, I have often wondered why I was one of the only males in any spiritual seminar or course I have taken, let alone why was I the only straight male if another male was present. Like you, I try to avoid linking homosexuality with femininity because that seems very broad brush, no pun intended. But I do wonder if it is this seeming balance of energies that makes them a bit more open to receiving energy or messages. Maybe it is simply that they are secure in who they are, and as straight males, we are seldom secure in our masculinity or lack thereof. There is always a stronger man, a better looking man, a better provider in every room with us, if only in our heads. I have no idea, though. I'm only speaking from my own narrow perspective. Again, in my mind, an open living homosexual male is living a life free of toxic mental masculine insecurity. Now that I'm saying it out loud, though, that seems a little far-fetched. We all have weird inner doubts. Christopher Kohler. I've had the pleasure of recently chatting with a beautiful lady named Dolly. She asks a question that I hear from people occasionally. She says, I have just started to binge on your podcast. I'm only a dozen shows in. I have to tell you, I have enjoyed every one. I'm self-employed and set my own hours, and sometimes I rush through the day, not out of need, but I guess I'm wired that way. Listening to your beautiful voice and well-placed music has done wonders for my day. I get the work done in the same amount of time, but in a more enjoyable, relaxed way. Thank you. I do have one question. Remember, I'm back at the beginning. Who is the sweet woman's voice that you use in break spots? Dolly. Well, Dolly, there's not a simple answer to this question, but like I said, people have asked this before. The lady you hear is a voiceover artist I contacted way back in the beginning. The funny thing is, she specialized in sensual voiceover work, but there was a slightly creepy quality in her voice that I just loved. But like Dolly said, also very sweet and comforting. I've since tried to contact her again to do some new work for the show, but I can't seem to find her. It's like she's disappeared. But I have to tell you, there's a commercial I hear frequently on Sirius XM when I'm in my car, and it sounds just like her. So you never know. Anyone know the commercial I'm talking about? I don't remember what it is at the moment, so let me know if you can think of it. Some other paranerds I've heard from include Steve Skinner with an awesome email. And I can't tell you about the email quite yet because I'm saving it for a possible upcoming On Location episode. More to come on that. I heard from Sam Haynes, whose creepy music you've heard in some of my Halloween episodes. He was excited to announce that he has a new album out. I'll link to that album in the show notes. I heard from Grace, who was considering getting a Ouija board, but wasn't sure if she was ready. But since then, she's written back because she's had some cool experiences. I heard from Cameron, who is my buddy from FedEx. I love hearing from Jim Budd often, same for SEL. I heard from Jill, who sent me awesome photos from their visit to the Villisca Axe Murder House, and I'm insanely jealous about that. I asked her to share those photos in the parlor just the other day, and she did. So check those out. I heard from our friend Richard Estep, who a while back got to meet Karen A. Dahlman. And you know who else Karen met recently? Claire Broad. I love when paranerds meet. I'm always in touch with our friend Lisa Gillespie Craft, who I got to meet and hang out a bit when she was here visiting family recently. She totally rocks. I often hear from our friends Susan Davey and Mitchell Coombs, who recently went to a Shania Twain concert in Australia and sent videos, which is totally mean because I'm very jealous. And speaking of Australia, I love hearing from Anne Rekovich and Renata Daniel every now and then. And I love tuning into all their wonderful live videos, either from investigations or their Paranormal Party podcast, which they've changed the name of that. And I'm never going to get it right here because I'll just mess that up. But if you haven't found them on Facebook, definitely do that. I heard from Yvonne, Amy, Andrea, Emilio, James, Rob, Heather, Ginger, Daniel Holden, Elizabeth, Lisa, Carl, Karen, Sarita, and Jacqueline. Well, let's get to some Apple Podcast reviews, shall we? Amy Park Gedicke says, touching all the bases. Love Patric's style and broad range of topics. As a fellow paranerd, I've learned a great deal about many topics, connected to experts of many fields, and gained validation regarding my own beliefs and practices. Patric creates a fun and interesting atmosphere. It's easy to believe you're sitting at the parlor table, sipping tea right along with the guest. From Australia, Lilies and Roses says, brilliant podcast and the sweetest host. I have been slowly working my way through the back catalog of this wonderful podcast for the past few months and have yet to hear a show I haven't loved. Such interesting topics, and Patric is impossible not to love with his engaging, natural, and warm interview technique. I'm completely hooked. Please keep them coming. P.S. As an Aussie, I have especially loved your interviews with our homegrown parapeeps. Thank you. Sonic 155 says, spookily good podcast. I listen to lots of paranormal-based podcasts, and this little gem is right up there with the best. Expertly produced and lovingly presented. I truly look forward to listening to it. Patric Keller, keep up the great work. Thank you for the Apple Podcast reviews and for making me blush. Well, before we get to Dena DeCastro's forecast for a new year, I have one last email to read, and you'll hear why I waited until now. This one is from Patty McKay. Hi, Patric. I found the podcast in September and have been listening to 1 to 2 every day on my commute to and from work. I recently listened to episode 112 with Dena DeCastro regarding the 2018 predictions. So I am one of your listeners from the future whom you mentioned. Ms. DeCastro was right on track with her predictions, particularly the current Saturn-influenced reap what you sow climate, government, environment, social media, etc. I found the second half of the podcast even more interesting and informative and helpful when you all were having your Aries party. I, too, am an Aries sun sign, as is my 17-year-old son who has Asperger's. For both of us, this year has been about working hard to get whatever next level for him, finishing high school, getting ready for college, and continuing to manage his behavior, and myself reconnecting with my spiritual psychic side. It's funny that this particular episode presented itself to me now. I haven't been listening in order, story of my life, right when I have been working hard to connect with my departed dad, and my son has been working on making some friends through marching band, of course, Paranerd represent, which is new for him. I had a little mind-blown moment as I remembered your interview with Marty Rosenblatt, who mentioned the interconnectedness of everyone. I listened to episode 112 in November. That was spot on for my son and I, but was a prediction for others in January. It's almost as if that episode was waiting for us. Very cool. I realize that one can consider it a coincidence, but like so many of your listeners, I don't believe in coincidences. I also just realized that my dad was an Aries too. He was March 22nd, 32. I am March 23rd, 67. And my son is April 9th, 2001. Cool, yes? Anyway, I really enjoy your podcasts and the variety of guests. My wheelhouse is definitely more ghosts, hauntings, paranormal, but I definitely find the other psi topics very thought-provoking. Best wishes, Patty McKay. Well, I love that we got a little recap with some validations of last year's forecast. Thank you, Patty. Well, all right. Take it away, Dena. I'll even pour you some tea. What's coming up for 2019?
Hi, Big Seance audience. This is Dena DeCastro, your astrologer, and I'm sharing with you the astrology forecast for 2019. We're looking at some planetary patterns, planets moving into new signs or re-entering signs, and we're also looking at the timing of the Mercury retrogrades for this year ahead. So the first big planetary pattern that's up is called Jupiter square Neptune, and the exact peaks of this transit are mid-January, June, and September. So it's happening as we speak. It's kicking off now, and it's going all the way through to September and even into a little bit October. This aspect is in range more a couple months either side of the peaks. And so really this is in range most of 2019. So Jupiter is about thinking bigger. It's pushing beyond limits, and it encourages us to believe in ourselves. Neptune is about tapping into the transcendent, opening up to the other world and the world beyond the five senses. So if Jupiter were to speak to you, it's saying, think big, push beyond your limits, and believe in yourself. And we're going to see that there's more with Jupiter as it enters Sagittarius, or as it already has entered Sagittarius this year, and we'll spend most of the year in that sign. And I'll get to that in a minute. And Neptune, if it were to speak to you, as saying, use your imagination, open to the transcendent, and play with reality. So when these two planets come together, it will make things very interesting. Reality, as we know it, may start to shift and change before our eyes. And on the one hand, this can be very magical. It could be a year where we find ourselves more able to tap into the mystical and the magical in life. At the same time, this may also provide the grounds for some confusion where we feel disoriented. So while Jupiter in Sagittarius is emboldening us to take risks and to go where we have not gone before, at the same time, Neptune in Pisces is inviting us to open up to that world beyond the senses. And so we're being pushed to investigate and explore the invisible world. And, one of the things that comes up with a square aspect as these two planets are coming together by a square is that there is usually tension between the two planets. So what is the stress or the tension around this configuration? So one of the things that shows up is it's a time to question our assumptions about how it all works, all the big questions, and question our own beliefs, question the foundational things that provide a template for the way we experience our daily lives. So it's a time of deep questioning. And for you, as an individual, this will be about getting right with yourself about what you believe and how that belief impacts the world that you live in, how that belief impacts your experience of your daily life. It's time to ask yourself, how are those beliefs helping and or hurting you? And what may need to be revised at this time. So through the square, Jupiter magnifies the Neptunian and the Piscean qualities of empathy, compassion, and surrender. We find ourselves more able to feel what others are feeling and to tap into empathy. So this is the high road with this aspect or this square, in that we're able to really open up to feeling what others are feeling and have more compassion and empathy. And, at the same time, we could be more sensitive in a way that we're maybe not used to. And so we have to also take care of ourselves as we are perhaps more permeable and open to other people's feelings. As most of you know, if you're a sensitive or an empath, or you even just feel like, you're generally someone who's an open-hearted person, it's a double-edged sword. You have to, be careful with boundaries. You have to make sure to protect yourself when you're in an environment that is not safe energetically. And so these themes come up really strongly as well with the Jupiter square Neptune transit. And then finally, the shadow attributes of Jupiter and Neptune squaring each other can be self-deception, some confusion. Neptune and Jupiter can really egg each other on, puffing up our illusions or delusions. So we have to do reality checks at the same time we're living in this magical or in-between place. So, this aspect is a tricky balancing act. We can open to the mystery, but we also must stay connected to reality. And we'll be challenged to find out, what is our true center? What is the core of our belief system within the topsy-turvy nature of the world around us? The next event or the next planetary pattern that's going on is Jupiter is in Sagittarius, and it has been there since November 8th of 2018, and it will remain there through December 2nd of 2019. So it's there for over a year and for most of 2019. Jupiter usually stays within a sign for about a year. And Jupiter here is in its own sign, which is really magnifying the themes of both Jupiter and Sagittarius. We're just going to see Jupiter themes more strongly. And some of those I referenced in the last portion. So Jupiter ruling Sag, it's the plan of inspiration and aspiration. It is the drive within us to take a leap of faith and to explore new territory, to take risks. And at the same time, Jupiter supports these risks. Jupiter in Sagittarius brings an abundance of good luck and opportunity our way more easily. And we can all collectively tap into this, that when we take a risk, when we take a leap of faith, it tends to pay off bigger at this time than maybe at other times. Sagittarius is a sign that aims to find meaning, to gain the big picture, and to push us to broaden our horizons, to go out of our comfort zones. So with Jupiter and Sagittarius in the spotlight, we're invited to test the boundaries of our perceived limitations. So as with any pattern or aspect or transit through a sign, there's always the shadow that can be playing out. And the shadow path of Jupiter and Sag is overdoing, overestimating ourselves, overindulging, perhaps even overworking, being too confident, when we fail to do reality checks. And so again, there has to be this balance between reaching for the stars and keeping your feet on the ground. And so this is further enhanced, this whole theme of, the balancing act, by the fact that Jupiter is square Neptune at the same time as it is moving through its own sign of Sagittarius. But if you're aware of these possibilities, these shadow possibilities, you're more able to avoid them. And if you're not a naturally confident person, or if you suffer from a lot of anxiety, more so than the average person, tap into this Jupiter and Sagittarius energy. And it's a kind of fake it till you make it approach. And trust that this year, the winds of luck will be more available. Believe in yourself is the key phrase or the affirmation of Jupiter and Sag. So this is how you use it positively, while at the same time remembering that, yes, you still have to do your reality checks and know that, there's the shadow road that you can go down. At the same time, open up to the possibility that you are heading into unknown territory and that you can do more, that you can reach more of life than you might have been able to in the recent past. The next pattern that's up is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And this is coming into play this year, 2019. It will be in range most of 2019, all of 2019, if you use what's called a wide orb of 10 degrees. And it is coming exact January of 2020. And this is a big deal. This is a 30-plus year cycle that Saturn and Pluto do make with each other. So in other words, Saturn moves faster than Pluto, and it goes all the way around, and then they meet up about every 30 some odd years. And this is a powerful time this year as these two, this cycle, the past cycle, is winding down, making way for the new cycle. And that new cycle again beginning next January. So this is like In the lunar phase terminology, it's the balsamic phase or the dark moon phase of this cycle. And that's always about endings and clearing the way for the new. So in the collective, we're likely to see, old structures are ready to die. New ones are on the way. New structures are ready to be built, but not yet. The building and the new comes more in 2020 and beyond. I mean, even more into 2021. So right now is this liminal time, and we have to sit in the dark for a bit and await a new reality that's yet unformed. And so in your individual life, you may notice that, there are certain structures and foundations that you've taken for granted, perhaps in the past, that have been the security for you, and you may have to let them go. It may be their time to go. Now, this can be frightening, and certainly Pluto has to do with facing our fears. Saturn is about facing reality. Pluto is about confronting the fears and the shadow material. So when these two come together, it's definitely a serious time. We won't be able to avoid the fact that some things in our lives are no longer working, are worn out, and are ready to pass. And as this happens, our fears will likely come up, but it does behoove us to face them down rather than to turn and run away. So, this doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, I'm sure, for 2019, but there are things that we can do to work with this transit rather than pushing against it. And that's always my advice with any planetary pattern is look at how we can work with the energy rather than against it. So we can intentionally wrap up things that we would like to see ending. If we have something in our life that you're just tired of, it's ready to go, and yet you haven't really found a way to bring it to a close. Maybe there's a job that you're ready to walk away from. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's something that is, a daily habit or a habit in your life that you're ready to let go of. This is a powerful time to set intentional endings, to ritualize those endings, to make space for the process also of grief and letting go. And grief is something that is also connoted by this transit. So we can allow the space for the ending, for the grieving, for the letting go in this year. And it really is in service of clearing the way for the new and what wants to be built in the future. And we can also take responsibility for those things that are ours to care for. That is a theme of Saturn, and choose to face the fears that block us from being all that we can in the world and to offer our gifts to the world. And that's the combination of Saturn and Pluto. And then we have Chiron re-entering Aries this year. Chiron entered Aries in 2018 for a few months from April through September. It will re-enter the sign on February 18th of 2019, where it remains through June of 2026. So Chiron has to do with our wounds and insecurities, often stemming from childhood events or traumas. And wherever Chiron is moving, wherever it is in the sky and whatever sign it's moving through, it will bring up those themes related to that sign. And the sign tells us, well, how can we heal this material? How can we tap into healing energies that are available to the collective right now? So Aries is a sign of self-focus, desire, and passion. And so in short, when we're honest with ourselves about what we really want, what we truly desire, then we can heal some of those old wounds. And Aries is also a sign that has to do with the expression of anger. So anger is something that, we are often challenged to deal with in a healthy way, in a proactive way. But anger helps us to know when our boundaries have been crossed. And Chiron's presence here is offering us a path to healing through the expression of anger. Anger helps us to defend ourselves in situations where we might feel drained or depleted or taken advantage of. And yet we can channel this energy in ways that do not do damage or harm to others. So it's about conscious processing of our anger, moving it through our bodies, perhaps through more physical activity, through being aware of that anger and actually working with it rather than pushing it down. These are the keys to healing in this coming year. And when we allow ourselves to express it in healthy ways, we can heal from years of suppressing it. And then we have Uranus re-entering Taurus. So there's a theme here with planets, Uranus and asteroid Chiron, entering and re-entering signs that they dipped into in 2018. So Uranus dipped into Taurus in 2018, May through November, and will re-enter the sign on March 6th of 2019, where it will remain for the better part through 2026. So Uranus is a planet that has to do with breaking free from the past. And it's about liberating ourselves, having a revolution or a breakthrough. And it's also a planet of experimentation. Taurus is a sign that has to do with our connection to our body, to the earth. And Taurus also represents the ability to find stability through our relationship to resources and money. As this transit correlates to our connection to our bodies, one of the opportunities is to be able to reimagine how we take care of ourselves physically. It's time to open up to unconventional methods and different approaches. So if there's a healing modality that you've been wanting to try, this energy gives you a boost, to be able to explore that and to do it with a lack of fear or agenda around, needing it to be the one thing or the thing that's going to work. So a key word is experimentation here. And if you're ready to do something radically different with your approach to diet and exercise, Uranus and Taurus can help you shake it up, shake up your old food habits, your exercise habits, and keep going back to that key word of experimentation. Experiment with some new things. Uranus and Taurus also supports breaking away from ingrained behaviors regarding money. So spending, saving, or lack thereof, and earning, those are patterns that you may have stories around and that you may have gotten into kind of a rut around. And so this is a good year, not only this year, but then beyond the next few years with Uranus and Taurus, to shake it up and rethink how you spend, how you save, and how you earn. And thereby, freeing yourself from your old habits and patterns and stories around money and resources. And then finally, we have the Mercury retrogrades this year, and we have 3 of them as per usual. So Mercury retrogrades are a regular thing. You've heard me talk about them before if you've listened to this podcast, and they happen about every 3 months, roughly 3.5 months, and they are about 3 to 3.5 weeks each time. So I'm going to list out when they are happening and the themes of each one. And you can mark these on your calendar and see, how this information can help you this year. And so the first Mercury retrograde begins March 5th and goes through March 28th, and it's in the sign of Pisces. So Mercury retrograde in Pisces invites us to go deep inside ourselves and reconsider how we connect to spirit. So you can change up your spiritual practice during time. Again, thinking about that theme of experimentation overall with Uranus. Is it time to try something new with what you're doing? If you have a spiritual practice, or if you don't have one, to investigate, what might be a good fit for you. And so this retrograde also is asking you to let go of the details more and gain a more expansive view of your life, getting that big picture, that overview. So watch out for signs and synchronicities and omens. And, this can be a really magical time if you allow it. The second Mercury retrograde happens July 7th through July 31st. And it begins the retrograde in the sign of Leo from July 7th through July 19th, and then spends the better part of it in Cancer from July 20th to July 31st. And so the first part in Leo invites you to reconsider your relationship to play and creativity. So what does it mean for you now in your life to have fun, perhaps as different to the past? Explore some new ways to have fun and, open up to new adventures in creativity and play with it. The word is play, fun, create. And sometimes we, lose track of or get disconnected from how we experience play and what that even means for us. Some people, when I do a reading for them and I bring up the word of play or creativity, they get it like a blank stare. Like, what does that even mean? I'm not a child, so how do I play? So this Mercury retrograde, that portion of it from July 7th through 19th will be a good opportunity to reconnect with what play really means to you now in your life. Mercury retrograde then will be in Cancer from July 20th through 31st. And this is inviting you to reconsider the meaning of your closest relationships. So what does family really mean to you? It's a good time to reconnect with people from the past, either in your blood family or your heart family, and those who are closest to your heart. It doesn't have to be blood family, but chosen family also applies here. And the key theme is a reconnection. And then the final Mercury retrograde of the year will be October 31st, starting on Halloween and going through November 20th. And it's all in Scorpio. And that's a Scorpio time. The sun is in Scorpio. October 31st, is that Samhain, Halloween, All Saints Day, Day of the Dead, the peak of Scorpio energy, really. And so this is a very scorpionic Mercury retrograde. And so it's about exploring our connection to that other side, perhaps the ancestors. It's a good time to do ancestral work or honoring of the dead in general. And also, there may be some grief processing that we need to do, and we might set aside time for ritual, creating an altar to people we have lost, and be open to that veil being very thin during that portion of the year, as it already is, but Mercury being retrograde makes it even more so. And if you would like to receive a free e-booklet on how to work with Mercury retrograde, please email me at dena@denadecastro.com and put Big Seance Mercury in the subject line, and I will send you a free gift just for being a listener to this podcast, which I really appreciate, and for taking the time to listen to me today. And so I also provide year-ahead readings. And so these energies that I've talked about in the podcast are for the collective, but there's always something going on in your individual chart, and we can get way more specific. So if you would like a year-ahead reading, please contact me again at dena@denadecastro.com, or you can go to my website, denadecastro.com, and all the information about my year-ahead forecast is there.
Thank you to the following super paranerds who support the show at patreon.com/Big Seance. Genesis, The Midnight Rose, Diana Lloyd, Natalie, Sonia B., Kim Robb, Jim Budd, Josiel Lorenzo, Susan Davey, and Paula Mitchell. My supporters at the Parlor guest level, who can be found at bigseance.com/parlor guests, are Linda of shimmeringmoons.com, Jeffrey Peck, Dena DeCastro of Dena DeCastro Astrology, Peggy Hagan, Sharon Bowles, Marion Hover Clairvoyant, Bruce Williams, Christopher Kohler, Lena and John of Carbon Lilies, Denise Sia, Anna Frias, Norman and Linda Keller, and Karen Prine. That sound you just heard was the above and beyond there's not even a category for your level of support fireworks display, because I have an awesome listener who chooses to remain anonymous, who supports the show at the $10 level. Thank you, Paranerds. I always enjoy these listener feedback episodes. If you have any thoughts, any further advice or expertise, or just want to say hi, contact me at Patric@BigSeance.com or join us in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. Well, before I go, just a quick announcement. I will once again be at the Haunted America Conference this summer, and so will Karen A. Dahlman and several other familiar Big Seance voices, which I'm totally ecstatic about. Till next time.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit BigSeance.com. You can find and subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and just about anywhere podcasts are found. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to BigSeance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to BigSeance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.